Well, hello everybody. My name is Jason DeCosta. Thank you for joining me on my show today called Consistent Preterism. Glad you could join me. Today I want to just talk about something that's pretty crucial for anyone who holds the IO view to understand and to be able to communicate to others, because obviously when you're explaining a view as such, you get a lot of pushback from people. And the pushback comes as a result of them just not knowing their Bibles, number one, and not seeing it for what it actually is. It can be pretty tricky with terms like Gentiles and all these different things going on. But, you know, you're going to get pushback. So you need to have your facts in order, and you need to have your argument in order so that when a troll tries to, shame you and, you know how they are. They come out with a lot of LOLs, like you're stupid and you don't know what you're talking about and everything. But what I found is that when you hit these guys right in the mouth with scripture and they can't answer, they usually just disappear. They go away. Excuse me. And it happened again it happened actually twice yesterday. David Peace, those of you know him on Facebook, he's a water boy. He believes in water baptism. He likes to baptize in his tub every day for the remission of his sins committed under Israel's law that passed away 2,000 years ago. He oftentimes shares a bath with Joe Daniels and Terry Crapper, and they all play with their rubber duckies as they, wash away their sins that they committed under the old covenant. So these guys are confused personified, right? They don't even understand what they're doing. They don't understand what they're reading. They put out articles that are the laughing stock of Facebook, for those who are really knowledgeable in the Bible anyway, of course. But anyways, he came on and he basically commented on one of my audios saying that IO is vile and disgusting and it's a doctrine of demons. I don't even know what he said. It was just stupid. You could tell he had no arguments. He just wanted to come and bash the view. So I came back and I gave him every opportunity. I asked him one question about Matthew 24:13, just one. And I said, if you can answer this, I'll have more for you. But I just started out with that one. And I told him, I said, I'm going to give you the chance to dissect the IO view right here for everyone to see. And that was about well over a day ago now. And he has just about a day. He has yet to even reply. And I even commented a few more times saying, David, where'd you go? Did you slip and fall in your tubby? And still nothing. So when you hit these guys with solid arguments, they have nothing. It takes the wind right out of their sails and they just go away. Another bozo last night commented on one of my old videos saying, enough is enough. Just tell us, we're waiting for you to really show us where the Bible says the new covenant ended. And these people they're full of straw man arguments. I never said the new covenant ended. I said the new covenant wasn't for us. Just like they say, oh, it's an everlasting kingdom. Yeah, I never said it wasn't an everlasting kingdom. It's just an everlasting kingdom that was for someone else. Okay, so anyways, enough about that. But I hit him with the same type of arguments and he just vanished away. And he also deleted his comment. So my reply was so powerful to him that he deleted that comment because he didn't want people to see that he asked it to me. So what I want to do is I want to give you guys the ultimate IO argument. All right. And this will shut anyone up. I guarantee it. Trust me. I know. All right. I want you to take a pen and a paper, and I want you to jot down these passages. There's only going to be maybe 7 or 8 of them. And I want you to write them down, write a couple notes that I'm going to give you with each passage and how they connect to each other. And I want you to take this, write it on your heart, store it on the frontlets between your eyes, just like the Israelites did with the law. All right, and I want you to know this whenever someone comes and says, you're a heretic, you don't know the Bible, you don't know what you're talking about. I just want you to present them with this arrangement of scriptures, and I want you to watch as they either wiggle, twist, and do anything they can to kick up dust to get out of it, or just disappear and vanish completely and don't even answer you. Excuse me, that was my coffee slurp. So we're going to start. This is the ultimate IO argument that will shut anyone up. Grab a pen, grab a paper. I don't care if you are as esteemed as Don K. Preston or William Billy Blunder Bell, or if you're as laughed at as Stephen Whitsett or law-breaking Bobby Statzer. This argument puts them all to bed. All right, it takes all the boys and tucks them in. It pulls their sheets right up to the head and says, shut up, son, it's time to go to sleep. That's what this argument does. So don't be afraid if you get one of these bozos with a D-div in front of their name, all right, and they come on and they start arguing with you. Go right to this argument and present it to them in a concise, clear way, and you'll see what I've been seeing is that these guys have absolutely nothing, okay? So the argument begins like this. A full number of Gentiles, okay? A full number of converted, saved Gentiles in this story, in this gospel story, makes 0 sense unless the story ended at the coming of the Lord. All right, I'm going to repeat that. A full number of converted Gentiles, meaning converts in the nations, okay, makes absolutely 0 sense if this story continues today. All right, now why? Well, think about it. If the gospel was to continue going to nations for the purpose of gathering in Gentiles, then there would obviously be no full number of Gentiles that had to come in before the end of the age. This is just common sense 101. All right, it is the most basic argument you could make when an anti-IOer comes at you. All right, again, a full number of converted Gentiles, meaning a full number of converts in the nations, makes absolutely 0 sense if the gospel were to just continue right through the coming of the Lord and go on for thousands of years, gathering in more Gentiles. Because essentially what you have is you have a full number of Gentiles that had to come in before the coming, and then you have more Gentiles that are coming in after the coming. Makes absolutely no sense. It's illogical in every sense of the word. All right? Why would this story show a full number of Gentiles that had to come in by the inheritance of the promise, if more Gentiles were going to come in afterwards? Why would this story have a full number of Gentiles that had to come in before just a subtle light switch change where absolutely nothing took place for these saints, like the full preterist would have you believe? The only thing that these full preterists would have you believe took place at the coming of the Lord is a very subtle, simple, internal switch where they became immortal beings. Not in the literal sense, of course, because they all still died, even though Jesus said that when in the age to come, those who are worthy to attain to that age will neither marry nor give in marriage, nor will they die, because they'll be like angels in heaven. But yet these people want you to believe that when that happened, when the coming of the Lord took place, there was a little change inside. They still died, even though Jesus said, nor will they die anymore because they'll be like angels in heaven. All right, and they don't want you to think anything happened. Nothing. All these promises and warnings and everything that they were told to look for, and the calling up and the change in the twinkling of an eye because flesh and blood couldn't inherit that kingdom. None of that happened. Nothing. So, again, here they are warning that there's a full number of Gentiles, meaning a full number of converts in the nations that had to come in before this glorious transformation took place at the end of their age, when the coming took place. Yet, people still think there's Gentiles that have to come in today, that are coming in today. It makes absolutely no sense. All right, so start out with that. Press them on that. Okay, before you even get into any scriptures, you ask those people, why would a full number of Gentiles have to come in before the end? Their argument is that nations are getting the gospel today. Nations and Gentiles is equal. Those are the same things. Those are the same terms. All right, it means the same thing. When you say the gospel going out to the nations, you're saying the gospel going out to the Gentiles. When you say the fullness of the Gentiles, you're saying the fullness of the nations. So it's the exact same thing, okay? So the gospel had to go to these nations for the purpose of getting all the Gentiles that needed to come in, and then the end would come. So now let's get into the scriptures, because once you present that to them, they're going to stutter, they're going to kick, they're going to squirm and scream, they're going to get that cognitive dissonance thing going on like, man, that makes a lot of sense. Why would there be a full number of Gentiles? And a lot of times they'll try to twist that, which is so stupid, like many people have, not just one, two. I've actually got this from a handful of people, that the term fullness of Gentiles doesn't literally mean a number. It means a quality. So, and I've asked people, please explain that to me, because that makes no sense. I need you to make sense of that statement. What did Paul mean when he said a fullness of the Gentiles would come in, and in that way all Israel would be saved? How does that even work if that means a quality of Gentiles? It doesn't. It makes no sense. It's a desperate attempt to explain away a passage that has been a thorn in the side to Christians for as long as anyone can remember. Let me take another slurp here. Okay. That's Colombian dark roast coffee, like Dr. Wayne Critchfield would say. But all right, so you've already stunned them, right? They're like kind of staggering back and forth. They're barely on their 2 feet. And here you come at them with the scriptures now. Now get your pens ready, okay? First one you want to bring them to is Matthew 24, verse 13. This one I can never get an answer from. Now, obviously, if you're dealing with a futurist, you can get an answer, because they don't see any relevance to anyone who received these letters or anyone who these things were spoken to. So everything's future to them. So they're basically like the short bus version of Christianity. So futurists, don't even bother with, all right? But if you're dealing with a preterist, then you can hold them to the fire on this stuff, because a full preterist understands that all of Matthew 24 was fulfilled. Jesus said all these things that I've mentioned on this Olivet Discourse will be fulfilled in this generation. Not a single thing in that entire discourse was going to be pushed out beyond that generation. It was all going to be fulfilled. And indeed it was. We know the historical facts confirm this clearly. And everything that he predicted did come to pass at the destruction of Jerusalem, the fall of the temple, the end of sacrifices, the passing of heaven and earth, the passing of the law, and the gathering together of his elect from the four corners of the earth, which was the Great Commission. But if you go to verse 13 in Matthew 24, it says this: "But he who endures to the end shall be saved," said Jesus. And here's the passage that you need to really hammer them with. Matthew 24:14, he says this: "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." So right off the bat, hit them with that passage and say, listen, Jesus said the gospel would go to the whole world and to all nations, and then the end would come. The end couldn't come until the gospel reached all nations, But Jesus says the end would happen in that generation and before some of these standing here died. That's from Matthew 16, 27 and 28. So clearly we know that the gospel had to go to all nations within that generation. Not literally all nations, but everywhere that it needed to go for the purpose of gathering the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So you hit them with that. Matthew 24, verse 14, and the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. And you ask them, okay, mark this down. Say, if the gospel went to all nations before the end, what nations are you bringing the gospel to today? You will hear silence. And if you even get an answer, I can assure you it'll be smokescreen. They'll do anything and everything they can to get the focus off of your question. So there's your first one, Matthew 24:14. If the gospel had to go to all nations before the end, and if that end took place in that generation, then what nations are you bringing the gospel to today? Okay? Now he's really staggering. All right, now, next, after that, take them over to Romans 11. And show them what Paul says in Romans 11:25. Okay? It says this, for I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant with Jacob when I take away Jacob's sins. All right, so Romans 11, verse 25 and 27 is your next passage. Jot that down. And what I want you to ask these bozos is, if Paul said that the fullness of the Gentiles had to come in by the coming of the Lord, okay? That's what he's saying here. Read it again. The fullness of the Gentiles will come in, and in this way all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant with Jacob, who is also Israel, when I take away their sins. So the covenant was being made with Jacob, with Israel. And all Israel was going to be saved by the time the Lord came for them. Okay? And guess what? The fullness of the nations, or the Gentiles, remember, that's the same thing. Gentiles and nations, folks. So Paul says the fullness of the Gentiles, the fullness of the nations had to come in, and in that way all Israel would be saved. And that had to happen by the coming of the Lord. Well, doesn't that match what Jesus just said in Matthew 24:14? How the gospel had to go to, quote, all nations, and then the end would come? So you have Jesus saying that the gospel would go to all nations before his coming, and you have Paul saying that the gospel would gather in all Gentiles before his coming. Those two things corroborate perfectly. Perfect match. Jesus saying all Gentiles would come in before the end. Paul saying all Gentiles would come in before the end. Jesus saying all the nations would get the gospel before the end. Paul saying all the nations would get the gospel before the end. Again, the relative nations, the pertinent nations, the ones where the lost sheep were in. All right? So show them that. Show them how Matthew 24:14, Jesus says this clearly. Then Romans 11:25 to 27, Paul matches that and says the exact same thing. All right, then if we go over to John chapter 6, this is the next one you want to write down. In verse 37 says this, all that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of the Father who sent me, that of all he has given me I should lose none, but should raise it up at the last day. Pay attention here. And this is the will of him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. So when was the last day, folks? That's verse 40. John 6, verse 40. Jesus is promising that everyone who sees him and believes in him would have everlasting life, and he would raise them up on the last day. You see how that's a conclusion statement, right? He's basically telling him that all the elect would be raised on the last day. You couldn't believe in Jesus and receive everlasting life after the last day. those elements were leading up to and would conclude at the last day. Those concepts, believing in him, everlasting life, all that concluded on the last day. That's the whole point here. And that corroborates with what Jesus said in Matthew 24:14, doesn't it? That all nations would receive the gospel by that last day, by the end, by his coming. Those things are synonymous. They're all the same. Last day, his coming, the end of the age. It's all synonymous. It's all the same stuff. Okay? And Paul, that also matches what Paul said, that all the Gentiles would come in, and in this way, all Israel would be saved by the coming of the Lord. Well, that matches what Jesus says here in John 6, that all the elect would be raised up on the last day. So far, you got Matthew 24:14, Romans 11:25 to 27, and John 6, verses 37 to 40. Okay? All showing that all the nations and all the elect had to be in before the coming. Clearly meaning that there is no elect, there is no nations, there is no Gentiles getting the gospel today, because they already all did. And then, now people will say, yeah, but who is the elect? You know, people like to make an argument that the Israelites were the elect in this story, but Gentiles were not the elect. The Gentiles were sort of like a side dish. Like the Israelites were the filet, and the Gentiles were the roasted asparagus. Okay, so they believe that the term elect is used for Israelites. But Gentiles are totally separate from that. The Gentiles just keep coming in. But again, what I just showed you totally crushes that, because Paul said the fullness of the Gentiles had to come in by the end. Jesus said the gospel would go to all Gentiles that needed it, and then the end would come. But look at what Revelation 7 shows us. It shows us exactly who the elect are. Verse 1 says, after these things I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, the sea, or any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels, to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. All right, now, so we see very clearly who the elect are here, do we not? The ones being sealed is the 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. All right, now, that defines who was going to be raised on the last day, right? The 144,000 of all the tribes of Israel, the elect, like John 6 says. All right? But, again, people are trying to argue that the Gentiles were separate from the elect. They say Revelation 7 says the 144,000 are, yes, they are the 12 tribes of Israel. But there's also something on the side. There's a party called the Gentiles that come in too, alongside of that. Now, right off the top, there's a big problem with that, because these people have the fullness of Israel coming in by the end, right? The circumcision party. They have all Israel being saved, but then they believe that the Gentiles weren't saved. They say the uncircumcision party's still coming in. So it makes no sense. They have one party of the two completely saved and wrapped up by the coming of the Lord, that party being Israel. But then they have the other party, the circumcision party. They have that still going on. So it just doesn't work. The truth is, both of them wrapped up in full and were all saved by the coming of the Lord. But I'm going to prove to you right now that the ones in the nations that were being sealed and saved were the same elect group. There was no difference. All right, in Revelation 7, that 144K of all the tribes of Israel, the elect, those are also Gentiles. Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 1. And look what Peter says in the opening of his epistle. He says, Peter, an apostle of Jesus, to the pilgrims of the dispersion. Now, that's actually temporary residents, obviously. So, to the pilgrims of the dispersion, ready? In Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, elect according to the foreknowledge of God the Father. Okay, so these were elect, but look where they're from. They're from the nations: Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia. Peter lists multiple nations there. But he calls them the elect. So do you see how the elect in Revelation 7 that were being sealed, who John defines as the 144 of all the tribes of Israel, are the same people that Peter refers to here in 1 Peter 1 as being elect? But Peter refers to these elect as being out in the nations, out in Asia Minor, out in Galatia, out in Pontus. So the elect were the 12 tribes of Israel, and they were out in the nations. That's why John in Revelation chapter 7, after he sees the sealing of the elect, he looks and beholds a great multitude from all nations, tongues, tribes, and peoples, standing before the throne, saying, "Salvation belongs to our God, clothed in white." They were redeemed. They had inherited their promise. So John hears this number, okay? He heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of Israel. Then he looks and he sees that great multitude from all nations standing redeemed and clothed. Same people, same exact people. And what I just showed you in 1 Peter 1 proves that wholeheartedly. Peter was writing to the elect in the nations. Okay, there's no two parties here. All right? And when we look at 2 Peter chapter 3, all right, what do we see there? Peter, writing to the exact same recipients, the elect out in the nations, says this. He says, "Therefore, beloved, looking forward to these things, be diligent to be found by him in peace, without spot and blameless. And consider that the long suffering of our Lord is salvation." Ready? "As also our beloved brother Paul, according to the wisdom given to him, has written to you, as also in all of his epistles, speaking in them of these things." Excuse me. So Peter, in 2 Peter 3, verse 14 and 15, and 16, I think, and 16, actually says that Paul also wrote to them about all these same things in his epistles. So that means that all of Paul's epistles were also written to the elect in the nations. Do you see what is happening here? What's happening here is you're seeing that the elect, the term elect, referred to one body of individuals. One, not two. Okay? Collectively, it was one body. There were two parties, the circumcision and the uncircumcision, the Jew and the Gentile. You had the elect Jews and you had the elect Gentiles. The elect Jews were law-observing and law-practicing Israelites. The elect Gentiles were non-law-observant Israelites living out in the nations. So you have both of these parties, who are both Israelites, coming in together, combining, being gathered back into one new man, making peace between the two. And the end result of that was all Israel saved. That's why Paul in Romans 11 says, when the fullness of them comes in, when the fullness of the ones in the nations comes in this way all Israel will be saved. They had to gather in the Israelites in the nations in order to fulfill all Israel being saved. And that had to happen by the coming of the Lord. So I hope that makes sense. You take them to Matthew 24:14, show them Jesus said the gospel would go to all nations before he came. Take them over to Romans 11:25-27, show them that Paul said the gospel would go to all Gentiles before the end came, and that the fullness of all those Gentiles would come in before the end came, and in that way all Israel would be saved. Then take them over to John 6 and show them that the elect would all be raised on the last day, and he would lose none. Then take them over to Revelation 7 and show them who the elect were. They were the 12 tribes of Israel. Then you take them over to 1 Peter 1 and you show them that Peter was writing to the elect in the nations. Which of course shows that the second half of Revelation 7, where John sees this great multitude from all nations, is the same group of individuals that John sees in the first half. It's the 144,000 elect of all the tribes of Israel. These were the elect. Jesus had commissioned them to go to the four corners of the earth. His messengers would go out and gather them from the four corners of the earth. That was his elect. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Revelation 7, where the gospel is going out to the four winds to gather and to seal the servants of God on their forehead. We know in Ephesians 1, verse 4, Paul tells them, just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame, having predestined us to adoption, yada, yada, yada. That's elect, folks. Paul is writing to a foreign nation, telling them they are elect. Which, of course, means that the Gentiles, simply meaning the Israelites out in the nations, were also the same body of elect individuals. They were of the 144,000 of all the 12 tribes. And we know James in James 1:1, of course, writes, James, to the 12 tribes scattered abroad, greetings, my brethren. So James didn't write to anyone but the 12 tribes either. You know, and people like to make this stupid argument that, you know, that what they do is they realize that they're trapped here. And what Larry Siegel has done one time, which is absolutely pathetic, is he realizes he's trapped, and he realizes that all the Gentiles came in and all Israel was saved. So he realizes that he can't be Israel and he can't be a Gentile. So what does he do? He says, there's neither today. There's just people. How stupid, right? He says there's neither Jew nor Gentile in Christ today. But the irony and the problem with that is that was a reality for those last days. Paul told those last days saints that there was neither Jew nor Greek. So that concept of there being no Jew or Gentile was relevant to those in the last days. It was relevant to the elect. Paul is telling the elect Israelites that there's neither Jew nor Greek. He's breaking down that wall in between them. But they're Israelites. He's gathering them in, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So when people say, there's no Jew, no Greek today, no. That was relevant to the last days when they were being gathered in. And that was leading up to the end. So that concept doesn't go beyond the end. All right? You can't say, oh, there's no such thing as Jews and Gentiles today. It's just all people. But again, these are unsubstantiated claims that cannot be backed up by the Bible in the slightest sense. So again, the ultimate IO argument. Make sure your notes are right. Ready? Matthew 24:14. Romans 11:25-27. Both showing, Jesus and Paul, that all the nations and all the Gentiles would come in by the time the Lord came. And all Israel would be saved. No one else can get the gospel. No more nations can get the gospel after that end came, because it wrapped up. That's the whole point. It makes absolutely no sense for a full number of Gentiles to have to come in before the end if the gospel was going to continue to go to the nations after the end. Common sense stuff here. Show them those two passages and tie them together. Tell them Paul and Jesus fully agree. And they'll, right off the bat, you'll have hit them with a triple threat punch that'll get them staggering and falling back. They won't know what hit them. Then take them over to John 6, show them that all the elect would be raised on the last day. Then take them to Revelation 7 and show them who the elect were. They were the 12 tribes of Israel. And then when they say, yeah, but there's a great multitude from nations, then take them over to 1 Peter 1 and show them how Peter wrote to the elect in the nations. And that shows that the elect, the term elect, refers to both Jew and Gentile together. There was elect Jews and there was elect Gentiles. And collectively, together, those two parties, the elect Jew and the elect Gentile, the remnant, was going to come in and all Israel would be saved. Paul lofts that up and tells you who these Gentiles are in Romans 11. He says they're Israelites. How does a fullness of Gentiles coming in result in all Israel saved? Because the Gentiles that were coming in were actually descendants of Israel. And then take them over to 2 Peter 3 and show them that Peter says Paul wrote to the same group, these elect in the nations, in all of his epistles. So all of Paul's letters can't be any different. And then take them over to Ephesians 1 and show them that Paul told the Ephesians out in Ephesus, these are foreigners. He told them that they were elect. They were predestined. All right. So you have all these, and James 1:1, of course, where James writes to nobody but the 12 tribes scattered abroad. So you have all these corroborating passages that show clearly that this story came to an end. The full number of Gentiles and full number of Jews came in, and all Israel was saved by the coming of the Redeemer. You will never get a good answer as to why there had to be a full number of Gentiles that came in before the end. But that's indeed what happened, and that's why John in Revelation 7 looks at this completed picture of salvation, and he sees a great multitude from all nations standing redeemed, clothed in white, saying salvation belongs to our God. And that was about to take place, wasn't it? When John wrote, that was literally going to come to pass. So what the full preterist doesn't realize, again, is that if this picture of all this multitude of elect from all the nations is still yet happening and still future to us, then they need to get to a point where that is complete, because Revelation 7 shows that completed picture. It shows the great multitude from all nations standing clothed and redeemed, having come out of the great tribulation, which causes more problems for them because we know when that was. That was the last generation. So the great multitude came out of that last generation, the gospel period. So that settles it right there. That has nothing to do with anybody post 70. All right, and that great multitude picture was a complete picture of salvation. All the elect having been raised on the last day. So unless you can point to a place in the future where there's going to be a future end when all the elect would stand clothed in white and redeemed, then that already happened, which again means there's no nations coming in today, because that's the great multitude from all nations. And like Jesus said in Matthew 24:14, the gospel would go to all nations before the end came. So do you see how it's sort of like a no way out dead end, right? You cannot get out of it. It's like a bushwhacker headlock. You know what I'm saying? Like a hacksaw Jim Duggan, if you catch my drift. So I hope that made sense, and I hope that you guys got that. If you didn't, comment, let me know. I'll do my best to explain it better. But write that stuff down. Have it ready. That way when one of these trolls acts as if you don't have any arguments, you can just slam them with that and watch them pitter away like the sad, pathetic excuse for theologians that they are. Not all of them. Some of them do good work. But guys like Law-Loving Bobby and Stephen Whitsett, Jack Royce, these guys are pathetic. Pathetic. All right, so show them. Show them this stuff and watch them wiggle and watch them get all uncomfortable. It's kind of funny. Anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful day. I'm going to leave it at that. I'll be back another day, another time, another place, another rhyme. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Listen, seeing you got what you were listening, cleansing my soul of addiction for now, 'cause I'm falling apart. Tension between us just like picket fences.